In today's video, we're going to take a look at some off-season trade talk involving teams like Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, and the Washington Capitals. Plus, we have some other news, including some injury updates and a suspension involving a goalie, which is not something you see very often. We'll discuss that and more coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. First up, though, I wanted to talk about the news involving our suspension today involving Blues goalie Jordan Binnington. He's been suspended for 2 games, which is they're citing as roughing/unsportsmanlike conduct. Last night's game between the Blues and the Wild became very, very close to seeing a goalie fight. Something that doesn't happen very often. The officials seem to be pretty adamant in keeping them separated. In my opinion, Binnington did what he does best, and that's when he starts to struggle, he melts down, gets a temper, starts mouthing at the other team, and chaos ensued, essentially, is what you can say happened there. After the Wild, I believe it was like 3 goals in a short time span. Ryan Hartman had scored, and as he skated through the crease area, it wasn't even in the full crease, he was actually just outside it, but the way Binnington was positioned trying to make the save, he was actually outside of his blue paint a little bit, and Hartman's skate made a little bit of contact with Binnington's pad and his leg going through. It wasn't really anything intentional by the looks of it. It's just, incidental contact is what I would call it, going through to celebrate with his teammates. In my opinion, no big deal, but we know Binnington is a hothead and tends to react that way. So after he went and attacked Hartman, and like I said, chaos ensued. Binnington had the mask off and the glove blocker, everything, acting like an idiot in my opinion. And then Marc-Andre Fleury, who was tending goal for the Minnesota Wild, he came down looking to satisfy Binnington's urge, because we know Binnington has been looking for a fight for a really long time. I call him myself the NHL's fakest tough guy. I'm not a Binnington fan at all. I think the way he acts is idiotic at times. I really think he needs to focus on goaltending, because clearly he's not really living up to the hype anymore. He had that magical run leading the Blues to the Stanley Cup, and to me, it's been steadily, progressively getting a little bit more downhill ever since. He got a big contract. He's still a decent goalie, but he has not been the same caliber goalie like he was during that Cup run, or anywhere close to it, in my opinion. And, I do wonder what his future is going to be like in the NHL. Obviously, the Blues are going to be tied to him for some time, and I know we've heard cases before of the coach, Craig Berube, or even the GM telling him that he needs to just focus on goaltending and leave the rest of it out. But he has this temper, and it tends to get involved, and eventually somebody's going to answer the bell here with him, and he's probably going to regret it, in my opinion. But he gets a 2-game suspension. It's rare that you see goalies get suspended or get in trouble with NHL player safety. It's even more rare you see goalies fight, which we were really, really close to last night, but unfortunately the officials wouldn't let it happen. Marc-Andre Fleury, I believe the last time, maybe the only time he was ever involved with a goalie fight was actually back in junior, which would have been like about 22 years ago. So I'm sure it's been a long time removed since he was involved in any kind of skirmish in that sense. But still, at the end of the day, Binnington gets suspended. The whole thing was unnecessary, and the whole tough guy act to me is just getting old, and he needs to focus on playing net and just doing his job and keep his temper toned down. Maybe he needs to go to anger management or something. I don't know. Some other news today, we get the word from the Montreal Canadiens that they've lost yet another player to a season-ending injury and surgery. Centerman Christian Dvorak is out after having season-ending knee surgery. The number of Habs players who have been out for season-ending surgery or out long-term this year has been absolutely crazy. The amount of man games lost is quite high. I don't know the exact number right off the top of my head here, but it's pretty crazy when you take a look at things. So yet another guy there that right now, as I record this video on Thursday evening, they're having quite a wild game with the Florida Panthers. Last I checked, it wasn't even halfway through the second period yet, and Florida was winning 9-4. Montembeault played the first, started the game in the first, gave up 3 goals, I believe, on 6 shots, got pulled. Jake Allen enters the game, and last I checked, he had given up 6 goals on 17 shots. So not exactly a goalie duel, not exactly a defensive struggle type of game, but Montreal certainly involved in some interesting games this year that I think they could be a much better, more exciting team. We'll see what happens next year, see where things go in the draft lottery for them. But certainly the Dvorak injury is just another line here on the long list of players that's been out, missed a lot of time this season. We got a word too that the Arizona Coyotes are set to sign one of their top prospects, and that's Josh Doan, who was a fairly high pick a couple of years back, the son of longtime NHL player Shane Doan. Of course, Josh Doan's been attending college hockey at ASU. Has had some good seasons there, and the belief is that he's going to end his time in college and sign with the Coyotes. As I record this, I don't believe that's been made official as of yet, but Coyotes reporters and other NHL insiders have talked about this here in today's news cycle, indicating that it is widely expected to happen. So I would imagine he would likely play with their American Hockey League system to start and see where things go. It looks like Josh Doan is ready to make the jump from college to pro hockey. Coming up here, speaking of the Habs, in a few days' time, not too distant future, we're going to have Marty St. Louis and Vinny Lecavalier, of course, for St. Louis, the head coach in Montreal. Lecavalier is working as some kind of a consultant position, and they're both going to be inducted into Tampa Bay Lightning Hall of Fame. Obviously, Marty St. Louis as a hockey Hall of Famer, and now they're going into the Lightning Hall of Fame along with Phil Esposito. So obviously, those two guys had long-standing careers. Both ended up leaving towards the end. St. Louis going to the Rangers. Of course, Lecavalier ended up getting a compliance buyout out of Tampa. Things kind of, started to regress, and he went on to play for a few other teams, including Philly and LA, before hanging them up. But the bulk of their success and was done in Tampa. They both had a lot of games, a lot of points, and certainly very much a well-deserved honor. A couple of injury updates. I know besides the Habs and Dvorak, Tyler Seguin and Mason Marchment both going to be out for a while for Dallas. Seguin still recovering from that leg laceration. As far as the team has said, it doesn't really sound for sure that he's going to be out short term. May not be too long term. He's skating on his own right now. No real clear-cut definitive time, but it could be a little bit before he's back. And Marchment's going to be out for 3 to 4 weeks with a knee injury. So certainly not the time of year you want to see some of your top important players going down, but a lot of teams are dealing with this in one way or another right now. So the Dallas Stars are certainly not exempt to that stuff. Now, on to the trade section of the video, where we're going to focus on 4 teams here today. First up, I see more reports today from the Washington Capitals, wondering what they're going to do this offseason. A couple of things are certain. They're going to be attempting to retool here on the fly. As I mentioned before, even though we've seen the Capitals sell off a bunch of players at the deadline, I do not expect them at all to go into rebuild mode. As long as Washington has Lechkin and Backstrom, the guys, and John Carlson, they're going to continue to go for it and try to see what else they can win during Ovi's tenure there in Washington. He's only got a few years left. It's like I mentioned in another video I put out in last, I think, 2 days ago. There's already reports of planning in progress of Ovi to return to play in Russia in the KHL for Dynamo Moscow when his contract with Washington is up. Yes, he still has 3 years left on it, but they're already kind of talking with things over in Russia and making plans for his return so that the team is hopefully in a good spot and they can contend for the KHL championship at that point in time when the time does come. I mean, it's not a secret that that's something that he's mentioned before that he desires to do before his career is all said and done, and before he's gives up the game of hockey completely. But Washington, one player that do want to move on from in the offseason is Anthony Mantha. That trade has not worked out well. Of course, Mantha was traded straight up from Detroit for Verana. Verana went to Detroit. He's now in St. Louis. Of course, ran into some other different issues he's had to deal with there, a lot of it personal, but neither player in their, at least those respective cities, really worked out. Verana was starting to work out early and then ended up with some injury issues and a whole bunch of other things. But Mantha is, a contract on Washington's book that they're not fond of right now. I'm not sure how they're going to get around it. It might be tough to trade given his lack of production and the amount of money he's getting paid. Maybe they'll consider a buyout. I'm not really sure if that's something they want to do, but either way, expect them to try to find a way out of the Mantha contract so they can use that money to go after another top 6 forward. They certainly want to add some more firepower here to the mix. I'm not quite clear what the future holds for Connor Brown, who was, of course, traded to Washington in the offseason from Ottawa for a pick. And then, of course, a couple games into the season, he ended up with season-ending injuries. So he's been out for 95, 98% of the season. So even though he typically is a solid, maybe not top 6 on every team, but top 6 or top 9 forward, depending on the depth of the other group he's with, could be a good player to stay there. But we really don't know. I'm not sure they really completely have a decision made on him. But expect the Caps to make some changes in those regards, especially around Mantha. Montreal, I see some talks around the Montreal Canadiens. This is fan speculation more than it is an actual rumor from an NHL insider. Of course, we see all the reports. I know even Elliot Friedman talked again recently about Pierre-Luc Dubois going to Montreal. Maybe we'll see that trade this offseason. If Dubois will only again insist on signing a 1-year deal in Winnipeg, and we know he wants to go to Montreal, we could see a deal. It's one of those cases where the Jets might not have a ton of leverage, but at the same time, they could choose not to trade him and play the season out, but then they're risking him being a UFA and walking anyway. So I don't know if Kevin Cheveldayoff's going to want to go down that road. But speaking of the Habs, though, the talk is that Denis Gurianov, who they acquired from Dallas for Dadonov at the deadline, is working out pretty good. I mean, the thing with Gurianov is that he's has not been consistent. Even though he has some skill, ability to score, is that the knock on him is he's difficult to play with and doesn't necessarily make his teammates better. I know that's kind of the general consensus around him, but he is a big body. He can play both wings, similar size to Josh Anderson. And I know that there's been a ton of trade interest in Josh Anderson. The Habs have rejected a lot of deals and offerings to acquire Anderson, and now there's been some talk wondering if, with the emergence of Gurianov being a similar size winger who can kind of give you the same sort of production, hopefully, would they consider moving Anderson, and now that they have him on the roster? I mean, obviously, at this point, Montreal's certainly rebuilding, but they need to have some veterans around. Anderson's certainly a more established veteran than Gurianov is. Clearly, they're high on him for not only his play, but what they think of him as a person and a teammate. So hard to say if they would do that, but it does make some sense that with the offers they've been getting, like I said before, there was rumors that there was a significant offer from Edmonton for Josh Anderson, including a first-round pick and something else, and the Habs chose not to accept that deal and move forward. So I have to think there's a good possibility they'll get offers again in the offseason, and with the changing roster, you have to wonder if it's more of a possibility that they may accept the next time around. When it comes to Vancouver, Rick Dhaliwal is reporting that he expects the Vancouver Canucks obviously to try to find some salary cap space by moving on from at least one or two forwards, with predominantly Brock Boeser and or Connor Garland. I mean, I know there's been some talk of JT Miller, but I think the general consensus is that Miller will be very difficult to move given the contract, the term, the money, and all that. And yes, he doesn't have a no trade clause until July, but still, probably still pretty challenging to get a deal done. But guys like Boeser and Garland will be more likely to get done. Now, of course, with this newfound cap space, they'll hopefully get from a Garland or Boeser trade. He's reporting that he expects them to be very interested in pending UFA forward Ivan Barbashev, formerly of St. Louis, currently of the Vegas Golden Knights. He says that Vancouver is likely going to be watching him closely and hoping that Vegas doesn't re-sign him so that he'll hit the market and they'll have a chance to talk and negotiate with him, as they see him as being a real good fit longer term. He can get a similar contract to a guy like Garland, for example, so moving out that money would certainly free up the space to bring in a free agent like him who they think would be a better fit with the roster. Now, of course, like I said, though, some of these trades are not going to be easy. There's even talk that Brock Boeser might be a buyout candidate if they cannot find a trade, which is, not something you would even have thought possible a couple of years back. But Garland, I can see them finding a decent deal for him if they really try hard enough. I think there's enough interest in him at different teams that, especially in the offseason when there's more flexibility, that they'll have some options there. So we'll see. But Barbashev to the Canucks, something to keep an eye on if he hits free agency. Also, an Athletic article I want to focus on quickly involving the Calgary Flames by writer Julian McKenzie, who is the Calgary Flames beat writer for the Athletic. Basically fielding some questions from fans. He was asked point blank if he feels that the acquisitions of Jonathan Huberdeau and Nazem Kadri, since they haven't clearly worked out production-wise this year, if he thinks that there's a possibility that one of them could be traded in the offseason, and maybe that they should go with a different mix, for example. Maybe the new mix of a new core where some of these guys they brought in just isn't working out. It's possible that can certainly be the case, and at times with different NHL clubs. Now, he says that he feels that the team brought both those guys in to be difference makers on a long-term basis, and that the big thing that he kind of wonders is whether or not Brad Treliving is still the GM will probably play a big role in that. Certainly, Treliving is one of the couple of GMs that is playing or working without a contract. You can throw Kyle Dubas of the Leafs in that equation as well. And we don't know what his future holds with the team. And if the Flames miss the playoffs, which is something that's looking relatively likely right now, you have to wonder is, will the Flames make a change? He's been there a long time. We haven't seen a whole lot of playoff success, and now they're missing the playoffs again after having a really crazy offseason. So you have to wonder what that future holds, and that could make a big difference. If you get a new guy coming in to run the team, maybe he wants to undo some of the things that the previous GM did. Jonathan Huberdeau and Nazem Kadri, even though they're great hockey players, they're both going to be substantially down in their production by the end of the year. Like, Huberdeau's on pace to have one of his worst seasons ever. Kadri's production is down significantly from his time in Colorado, which, to have it down a little bit wouldn't be shocking, but he's still playing with some really good players. So certainly, we didn't expect that much of a drop to give him a 7-year, $7 million deal. So is it possible that one or both might even want to get a fresh start and move on? Like, you have to wonder. Now, Huberdeau's contract would be challenging, very challenging to move, because they gave him a lot of money on a long-term deal. Kadri's would be a little bit easier, be less term, a little less money, lots to like about his game. So hard to say, but essentially Mackenzie's synopsis was that it could be considered, but it's really going to boil down with the Calgary Flames if they have a new leadership at the top in management or they don't. Because if it's the same GM, he imagines that he's going to give this core group another chance and try to tinker around and maybe just make a few adjustments and hope things can get better. But at the end of the day here, Daryl Sutter might be part of the issue. I don't know if he's the right coach for that group either. Lots of things there to consider in Calgary, but I think if the Calgary Flames are going to change the GM, to me they're going to do that, if not now or anytime really as the season is over. They're definitely not going to want to allow a GM to go into the draft when its contract would expire like a week later. That's not something we're going to see. So they're either going to extend Trey Living or they're going to fire and hire somebody else before the draft, probably well ahead so that they would have time to be ready. Obviously, a lot of the other staff involved amateur scouting does a lot of that prep work too. So depending on how much of a house cleaning they want to do, will determine how much work there will be to be done to be ready. So we'll have to wait and see. Certainly interesting times in Calgary. Could Huberdeau or Calgary be traded? Are they in the right team? Do they have the right mix of players there? Or do they need to really make some changes to that core for it to really take a step forward and be more successful, like we were thinking they could be after last year's blockbuster trade and changes we saw in the summer? Let me know your thoughts on that and everything else discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.